Last Dawn Standing: The Secret Life of Mob Boss Ralph Natale, by Larry McShane and Dan Pearson. Narrated by Alexander Sendies. Any man who tries to be good all the time is bound to come to ruin among the great number who are not good. Niccolò Machiavelli. Any man can take a life, but only a king can spare one. An old Sicilian proverb. Cast of characters. A quick guide to the Philadelphia La Cosa Nostra. Ralph Natale, killer, union leader and organizer, head of the family from 1994 to 98. Angelo Bruno, family boss known as the Docile Don, ruled peacefully for more than 2 decades, murdered. Phil Testa, a.k.a. the Chicken Man, succeeded Bruno as family boss, murdered. Johnny Skinny Razor DiTullio, legendary mob captain and Natale's mafia mentor. Nicky Scarfo, Atlantic City-based mafioso who took over the family following Testa. Joe McGreal, mobbed-up South Jersey union leader, murdered. Salvi Testa, son of Phil Testa and widely considered the brightest star of the Philly mob's next generation, murdered. Frank Vadino, Ralph's driver and right-hand man. Ronnie Turchi, a valued member of Ralph's crew and eventually his consigliere, murdered. Blinky Palermo. With New York mobster Frankie Carbo, he served as the mob's fixer of fights for professional boxing, a close friend and advisor for Ralph. Joseph Skinny Joey Merlino. Second-generation gangster who served as Ralph's underboss when Natale returned to Philadelphia. Michael Mikey Chang Ciancaglini, a member of Merlino's crew with a fearsome reputation. Ralph's favorite of the crew he assembled in Philly during the 90s, murdered. Raymond Long John Martorano, drug dealer and partner of Angelo Bruno, eventually became a made member of the Mafia family, murdered. John Stanfa, the driver who set up Bruno for assassination, later ousted by Natale from the top of the Philly family. Charlie Allen, Blinky Palermo's nephew, a mob hanger-on and a federal informant. Raymond Bernard, Ralph's cousin, drug dealer, and another federal informant. Anthony Tony Bananas Caponigro, Newark-based family consigliere under Bruno, an instigator of the plot to kill the boss, murdered. Pete Casella, traitorous underboss who plotted against Testa. Prologue. Christmas Day, 1973. The gifts were unwrapped and the dishes from a sumptuous holiday dinner put away at the suburban New Jersey home, a 2-story colonial, right off the Cooper River in Pennsauken. As the Natale family settled in front of their television to watch a Yuletide special, their patriarch's mind focused on a task that was far removed from peace on earth or goodwill toward men, especially if that man was Joe McGreal. Ralph Natale donned a 3/4-length leather jacket before stepping into the darkness and heading alone toward the garage in the waning hours of Christmas Day. He marched through the breezeway toward his waiting car. He had a moment of discomfort as he pondered the task ahead on this holiest of holy days. For a minute, he thought about turning around, spending the rest of the night with his family. Instead, he stood alone, engulfed in the solitary silence. For a moment, he later recalled, I felt like I was the only human being on Earth. Natale kept walking, kept thinking, as he headed toward the garage where his Buick Electra was parked. His mind cleared as he finally reached his destination. Natale pushed aside a fake wall to find the weapons secreted behind it and removed a pair of .38 caliber snub-nosed revolvers. Next, he grabbed a box of hollow-point bullets and carefully loaded both weapons. One revolver went into a holster on his right ankle, the other into a deep inside pocket of his stylish coat. He opened the garage door and climbed inside the car. He backed the Buick into the driveway, then climbed out to carefully close the garage door, intent on not disturbing his happy family. Natale reached down to touch his ankle holster, then felt for the weapon in his coat. It was an old habit. and old habits die hard. He put the car in gear and headed toward a cocktail lounge in the Holiday Inn opposite the racetrack in Cherry Hill. Waiting there was McGreal, a once trusted associate in the world of La Cosa Nostra. The two were partners in the Mafia's takeover of Local 170 of the Hotel Employees and Restaurant Employees International Union. Natale, for most of his life, valued loyalty above all else, and Joe McGreal had betrayed him. The pretense for the meeting was a Christmas shakedown of a new restaurant on the White Horse Pike in Camden County. Ralph arrived at the bar first, taking a seat with the manager, Franny McDonnell, an old friend whose presence was meant to assure McGreal this night was business as usual. Drinks were served and drinks were downed. Then it was time for work, with Natale inviting McDonnell along for the ride. McGreal was eager to get going. "Come on, Franny, we'll have a few drinks on the house at the new joint." As the three men walked toward McGreal's El Dorado in the lot outside, Natale noted the bulge in the right-hand pocket of the Irishman's dark cashmere overcoat. The gun bounced slightly with each stride by McGreal. McGreal opened the driver's side door and popped the car's locks. Natale slipped into the back seat, staking out his turf, in the spot directly behind McGreal. The bar manager grabbed the shotgun seat. They drove for 20 minutes along the Black Horse Pike toward the eatery. As McGreal turned into the restaurant's parking lot, he sensed something wasn't right. None of the lights were on inside.
"Hey, it's dark over here. What's up, Ralph?"
"Here's what's up, my friend," Natale replied. Ralph already had one of the .38s in his right hand, and he fired directly into the back of McGreal's head. In a cruel twist, apropos to the holiday, the El Dorado was a gift to the dead man just months earlier from Ralph Natale. 1. A sit-down with the boss. The last legitimate don of the Philadelphia family of La Cosa Nostra sits alone at a long table in a quiet room. Ralph Natale, an integral cog in the city's organized crime scene since his teens, still exudes a bit of genial menace. Now into his 80s, he sports a runner's physique, the result of a daily morning jog followed by a weightlifting session. His salt and pepper goatee is neatly trimmed. His eyesight is failing, but his mind remains sharp as a stiletto. Dates and details spill forth as he sits beneath a knit cap, a reminder of his prison days, when Natale struggled to keep his bald head warm inside a chilly cell. He's now 4 years out of prison, his second bid, mob speak for a prison sentence, 13 years on a drug rap. The earlier stay cost Natale 16 years and a large chunk of his 5 children's lives. Lost birthdays, graduations, weddings. It was his choice. Natale could have walked free if only he chose to rat out associates, such as revered Philly mob boss Angelo the docile Don Bruno, his mentor and friend, legendary Chicago boss Anthony Accardo, and mob-connected union boss Ed Hanley. He kept his mouth shut and did the time. It was the code that he'd learned and lived on the streets of South Philly. Ralph Natale was the ultimate stand-up guy, right up until the moment he sat down in a witness chair as a government witness in 2000. At that time, he became the highest-ranking mafia member in history to turn federal witness. The years in lockup still affect Natale in other ways. He has trouble sleeping in a bed. Many nights he leaves his wife, Lucia, alone to make himself comfortable on the couch. It feels more familiar, reminiscent of his jailhouse lodgings, as he drifts off to sleep. His bottom teeth are gone, lost to lousy prison dentistry. Inmate Natale once yanked an achy tooth himself with a strand of dental floss rather than wait for a dental appointment. And he's uncomfortable in crowds, with an hour in a room full of strangers leaving Natale disoriented after nearly 3 decades in the company of nobody but inmates and prison guards. "It's what my life was," he explained. "Even before all that, I watched myself on the street. I was very wary. I watched everything and everyone. I don't like people behind me. I got threatened every day of my life. I told people, you know where I am. My car's parked outside, bring it on. Every morning I drove away from my house, and I looked back in the rearview mirror. Then I made the sign of the cross. So far, it's worked. Look how lucky I was to end up here." He doesn't reflect much on his old days and his old ways. The days at the track and the nights at the bars. His days as a union boss hobnobbing with Jimmy Hoffa and the Teamsters hierarchy. The times when he had to pull the trigger or give an order to take a life. Natale's voice turns deep and raspy as he growls about his time as a killer, when his preferred tool was a .38 caliber revolver filled with hollow-point bullets.
Men that can kill without hesitation and it doesn't bother you. You think, what the hell is wrong?
He murmurs.
But I did it. It's just some people are made that way. Not serial killers. They have no reason. If you have a reason, you get it done with. Fuck it. Go have a drink somewhere. Maybe today brings something else.
He would eventually confess to killing McGreal and another man and acknowledge his role in 6 more murders during a bloody Philadelphia mob war involving his long-shot ascension to head of the local mafia family, the apex of a 5-decade run in the life. But word on the South Philly streets linked Natale to mob murder and menace far beyond those 8 deaths. He shrugs when recalling those days.
When McGreal got killed the next morning, it was Ralphie,
he said.
Somebody got killed in Detroit. That was Ralphie. Meanwhile, I was in Philadelphia. I used to laugh, but it was good for the reputation.
Even now, he takes pride in his efficient, lethal work and shows no remorse for anything.
It's not that I take pleasure in it,
he explains.
I never take pleasure in killing anybody. I tell you, when it comes to that there, I kill 'em so fast they don't even know they're dead. I shoot 'em right in the face.
But his rise from a kid shuffling betting slips in South Philly bars in the 1940s to point man for the mob's infiltration of Atlantic City in the 60s and 70s, to the dawn of the Philadelphia mob in the 1990s, was defined as much by the men he spared as those he killed. Natale's decisions to let mob associates Charlie Allen and Ron Previty keep breathing, made nearly 2 decades apart, twice landed him behind bars for double-digit jail terms, and a direct order from boss Angelo Bruno stopped him from killing the treacherous and bloodthirsty Atlantic City mobster Nicky Scarfo, a choice that proved disastrous for the entire Philadelphia mob family after decades of peace and prosperity under Natale's friend, the docile Don.
Pinpoints in time,
he now observes, with the detachment of hindsight. Life is often about karma and the ever-widening ripples set in motion by a single choice, an ill-chosen word, or the holstering of a handgun. Death can come from a simple hand gesture, a nod of the head, a roll of the eyes.
No matter how insignificant they appear at the time they occur, these things can determine a man's life until there is no more,
Natale says. Atlantic City, viewed as a Garden of Eden for greedy Philadelphia mobsters once gambling was legalized, became a recurring theme that ran through much of his life. Natale was there for the mob's initial plans to seize control of the casino unions. He stewed behind bars as mob rival Little Nicky Scarfo ruined the Philly family and threatened to interrupt the flow of cash from the Jersey Shore. And Natale returned to his hometown from jail, determined to reclaim the prize. Ralph Natale spent 29 years of his adult life in jail. The first stretch was a direct result of another Natale decision. He was no rat. Promises of early parole, lonely years apart from his wife and growing family, a poisonous anger that grew as he felt the betrayal of his fellow mafiosi. Nothing could convince Natale to flip and work for the feds. Until he finally did. There are things he misses about the mob life. The pumping adrenaline and the high-wire tension of day-to-day life outside the law. It was a man's world, good men and bad men, killers and thieves, bosses and capos. At one time, men of honor and respect. Later, men considered punks and pretenders by Natale. This was his world for most of 5 decades.
You walk into a room and you know something's gonna happen,
he says of those days.
When I see in somebody's face what they see and what they're looking at. Or you're walking with somebody, and you know in your heart of hearts he wants to kill you, and you're thinking, I'm gonna kill him as soon as I can. I want you to understand I'm not a maniac or a mob serial killer. I never touched an innocent person in my life. I never touched a woman or a child, or a man trying to make a living for his family. I can say that because that's what I am. But you fuck with me, you're gonna have a problem. Some men are that way. I was that way. That's what it is.
Natale explains what he means with a pop culture reference, quoting from a Quentin Tarantino movie.
Did you ever see the movie Kill Bill, when David Carradine and Uma Thurman are fighting at the end and he shoots her with the truth serum and they're talking? He says, "You know, you're a born killer, and that's what you'll always be. And I'm a killer too."
Natalia is adamant about one thing. His story is the one true tale of the rise and fall of the family that he twice swore an oath of lifelong loyalty and silence to serve and protect.
"It's the real mafia story, no bullshit," he declares. "When that guy Mario Puzo wrote The Godfather, he had a lot of friends in different families. They told him little episodes. He wasn't there, but he finally put it all together."
And then Ralph Natale starts to speak. 2. Kids in Philly. Ralph Natale was born hard. The son of the unforgiving South Philadelphia streets arrived on March 6, 1935, brought home by a tough-guy father and a mother with few maternal instincts in the hard times of the Great Depression. Ralph was the older of two sons born 5 years apart. His parents were the first generation of their families born in the United States after his 4 grandparents had emigrated from Italy to the city of brotherly love. His paternal grandparents died 2 weeks apart during the 1918 flu pandemic that ravaged the city's Italian neighborhood. An estimated 30 million people died worldwide, with 12,000 killed in Philadelphia as its tiny morgue was overrun with corpses. People struck by the killer bug were moved from their beds into wooden coffins, even before taking their last breaths as the disease spread. The coffins were then stacked on street corners, where they were loaded in bulk on flatbed trucks and taken away. Josephine Iannelli Natale went first, believing that her husband, Ralph, would survive to raise their 3 children, 12-year-old Michael, 8-year-old Sammy, and the baby, 5-year-old Grace. But Ralph had already contracted the deadly disease, and he joined his immigrant wife inside the coffins on the sidewalks of South Philly. The 3 kids were left on their own, and life as an orphan exerted a profound effect on the eldest son, Michael. "My father never knew a love or kindness from a mother or a father," Ralph recalled. "So how was he to know how to give this to a son? Not a word of kindness or a simple touch of love from either mother or father since I was old enough to remember. They were never, 'You're gonna be okay,' this and that. Never once." Michael Natale became known on the streets as Spike. His sons, Michael Jr. and Ralphie, a pair of peas from different pods, grew up in 2 different worlds inside the same home. Michael Jr. was artistic, sensitive, and Ralphie was becoming Ralph. "He was so different from me," Natale said. "He really was." The lack of a kind, loving home emotionally crippled young Ralph, whose moral compass went askew before puberty. He found himself devoid of good feelings, cold-blooded, and predatory in his approach to life. "What made me this way?" he mused decades later about the arc of his life. "I never knew what love was in that house. They were always fighting, always angry. And I said, 'Oh, that's where it's at. If that's where it's at, that's what life's gonna be for me.' And I went that way. And I prayed for their souls, that they would be in peace." Spike worked as a pickup man for the Philly mob, collecting betting slips around town from assorted mafia-backed businesses. He collected clips left at the counters of candy stores or stuffed inside pipes in back alleys. Spike never owned a car and was seen daily making his rounds on foot through the local streets, ultimately delivering the paperwork to a pal named Sparky. Spike wound up doing a bit of time at Eastern State Penitentiary. His slender frame didn't carry much weight, just 125 pounds, although he toted a .45 caliber pistol that weighed more than he did, Natale recalled. "But a tough guy. Tough." Spike also ran a numbers business in the black section of South Philly, off South Street. The only bit of childhood bonding between father and eldest son was the day when Spike taught his boy how to fire a gun. "I shot his .45. He took me down on the waterfront and said, 'Hold it with both hands,'" Natale said. "Boom. They were like cannons." The first time Natale felt the homicidal rage that would become so familiar in the future came one night at age 12, when he violated his father's strict 9 p.m. curfew. The boy lost track of time and returned home to find his dad waiting at the front door. He still remembers the first words out of the old man's mouth, and everything that followed.
Son of a bitch, I told you, said Spike before planting a hard kick with the side of his foot on the youngster. Ralph's reaction seemed to come from nowhere and consume his entire consciousness, like some long-hidden instinct just now bubbling to the surface. He went from humiliated to infuriated in seconds. The life-changing boot still stings all these decades later. It would have been better if he smacked me or punched me in the face, Natalie remembers. But that's like I was scum. You kick somebody that way. I turned around and I said, "Don't you ever touch me again, and don't you ever think about doing what you just did again." I have to tell you, if I had something in my hands, I would have killed him. That's when I knew what I was. 12 years old. The truth, I mean it. I wouldn't let nobody touch me like that again. Nobody. It's there. It's always there. Outside the house, the Philly kid did his best to find a safe place. He served as the undersized, if athletic, catcher on a youth league team that won the City Police Athletic League title, where third-grader Natalie was coached by a pair of Philly cops. I was a good ball player, and it's not bragging, said Natalie, who played catcher when none of the other kids wanted to wear the so-called tools of ignorance. But it was his father's mob cohorts who appealed to the youth, already envisioning a crooked future in grammar school. Spike provided his son's entree to the underworld, enlisting the preteen to handle a collection from a black bar owner named George Wallace. Like father, like son. Spike told Ralphie that he should travel on foot, and so the young Natalie marched through the black section of the city on his mission. He knew that I knew how to handle myself, Natalie recalled of his first taste of illegal business. He told me, just be careful, and do what you gotta do, 'cause you're walking through a tough neighborhood. But a lot of the black kids went to school with me. They knew who I was. They knew they might get me now, but if you did, you'd better leave your neighborhood, 'cause if I'm alive, I'm gonna come back. That was the reputation I had at 11 years old. The youth headed to Wallace's home and knocked on the door of the address provided by Spike. A woman answered, looked at the little white kid, and asked what he wanted. Ralphie politely replied that his father had dispatched him to see Mr. Wallace. She smiled. I was the most respectful little son of a bitch, Natalie says with a smile. I really was. She said, okay, he's not here. He's at the bar over on the corner. You want to come in here and wait for him? I said, I can't come in. When Mrs. Wallace asked why, the boy provided a ready answer. Your man is over there. He's not here. The adult Natalie laughs in retelling the tale. She loved that. That's how I was when I was a boy. She sent me over to the Budweiser bar. I open the door, the jukebox is going, and there's a voice. What do you want here, boy? Are you Spike's son? I said yes, and he told me to come over. I said, you're Mr. Wallace? He laughed. Oh, you're checking me out. Come with me. We went into the men's room, and he gives me the sheet. He says, how did you get up here? Well, I walked. He said, you got a lot of balls. I'm going to give you a lot of money, too. The diminutive bagman's reply was succinct. I don't care. I'm supposed to come up and see you. I didn't know what you were going to give me. Wallace laughed and asked if Ralphie wanted anything from the bar before the long walk home. I don't drink, the youngster replied. Wallace never forgot his exchange with the well-mannered boy and never failed to bring it up when they crossed paths during Ralph's ensuing ascension to the upper echelons of organized crime. Just as the kick had galvanized Natalie's outlook on life, the trip cemented his plans for the future. I was 11 years old, and I thought, this is it. There was no hesitation. I never hesitated. I wish I had sometimes. When somebody pulled out a pistol, it didn't bother me, 'cause that's what you had to do at that time. I learned what those kind of men said. If you don't step up, you're going to be left behind. If somebody said, let's go, you better get up. You can't hesitate. And to step up, I was always first. Despite his troubled home life, young Ralphie excelled in school. The bright young student was quick to raise his hand in class, much to the delight of his second-grade teacher. He was particularly adept at reading comprehension, retaining details and descriptions almost instantaneously. The brightest students were often allowed to skip a grade, and he was moved directly from the second grade into the fourth, and then again from the fourth to the sixth. Natalie, in class with kids 2 and 3 years older, became less comfortable and less interested in education. A junior high school IQ test nevertheless confirmed that Ralphie was among the sharpest students in his grade,
and Natalie recalled hearing the results from a teacher, a 138, a ranking of superior intelligence.
Mr. Horowitz told me I had one of the highest scores that he'd ever seen, said Natalie. According to Mr. Horowitz, I could have been anything I wanted to be. But who's going to tell me about being anything else but what I was, if I'm that way already, like I was?
Natalie was thrown out of Southern at age 14, the second high school to banish him, and so began the real education of Ralph Natale, with classes conducted across South Philadelphia, in the streets, in the bars, and in the humidor of Yan and McCormick, South Philly's biggest cigar store.
I love South Philly,
he recalled wistfully.
I love the people in South Philly. I love the air. I love the scent and aroma of different cooking. I see a woman walking and pushing a cart. I enjoy that. That's my family. That's where I was born and raised.
His favorite spot was always the Italian market, a retail center unlike any other in the city. Cheese shops stood with fruit and vegetable stores, alongside fish markets and butcher's shops where live animals were killed and sold. The streets were filled with tantalizing scents. Passers-by enjoyed free samples of the homemade cheese and Sicilian-style black olives, sprinkled with red seed pepper. Here, amid the hustle and bustle and constant commerce, a young immigrant named Phil Testa made a living selling chickens. A strange combination of good luck and bad fortune would eventually lead him to the top position of the Philly mob for a mere 12 months. 3. Love and Devotion. Aspiring mobster Natale was 15 when a pal convinced him to leave the neighborhood for a Friday night dance at a nearby church. The pair had played in a sandlot football game earlier in the day, with Natale breaking his nose while making a tackle. In addition to his one and only suit, a well-worn blue number, the teen sported a pair of nascent black eyes. The suit was so shiny from repeated trips to the dry cleaner that
it looked like it would shatter if I fell.
The young Romeo donned a white shirt and his lone tie for the trip, enticed by his pal Bucky's pitch.
He said, "Come on, I heard there's pretty girls from above Broad Street. And those girls didn't swear. In my neighborhood, there were nice girls, but they'd fist fight with you and call you motherfucker, this and that." I said, "I don't feel like going." He finally talked me into it, and that's where I met my wife.
Natale spied 18-year-old Lucia from across the dance floor and resolved to make his move. The nervous young suitor asked for a dance, but there was a problem. He didn't know a single step. The beautiful older woman, who worked as a dressmaker in a South Philly business, also noticed that Ralph looked a little younger than his declared age of 18. But love won out. Ralph walked her home and asked her for her phone number.
"I never forgot it from that day. Fulton 94326, he declared. She said, "You gotta write that down." I said, "I don't have to write your number down. I'll remember." Oh, I came up with some lines.
Their courtship was quick, as the underage Natale, without a driver's license, borrowed cars from older guys to take her on dates. Lucia finally told Ralph that she knew he was just 16, but they were young and in love, and it didn't much matter. On one of their dates, she broke the news to Ralphie. She was pregnant. He was 16 and about to become a father, and it turned out a husband. Once again, he never hesitated.
I said, "Let's get married," because I loved her. I loved her no matter what I did, and I still love her deeply.
The teenaged couple, after welcoming their first son, found a small apartment to raise their family. Natale, despite his tender age and inexperience, was an up-and-comer in the world of the Philadelphia mob. His first concern remained constant, providing for his wife and kids by any means necessary.
"I would do anything. I liked to work," Natale recalled. "We didn't have much, but we started to move up a little bit. And I always did every little thing."
In the fall of 1955, Natale fenced some stolen goods, turned a quick profit, and decided it was time to go see his favorite ball player, New York Yankees center fielder Mickey Mantle. The Bronx Bombers were facing the Brooklyn Dodgers in the World Series, and Natale turned his cash into 2 tickets for Game 3 at Ebbets Field. By then, the couple had welcomed a second son.
I told my wife, "Can your mother watch the kids?"
He remembered with a smile decades later.
I got seats out in right center field, and we watched. I said, "Don't worry. The Mick is going to hit one out." The next inning, he hit a tremendous homer. What a time that was to go to New York.
The young couple bought a pair of souvenir mini-bats, each inscribed with Mantle's name, to bring back for their boys. Though Natale found himself naturally attracted to the older mobsters who mentored the young thug, he still bristles at the suggestion that he was in search of a substitute father.
I'm far from that stereotype, he said flatly. That ain't me, not in a million years. I don't need no father. My father was a strong man, but he was not my father to me. I mean, I came from his seed, but he was not my father. I am what I am. I just wanted to get ahead for my wife and children, to give them something.
His decision to join the Mafia came as no surprise to his large extended family, which included his mother's 9 siblings.
They were proud of me, he declared. They knew me since I was a boy, and they told people, you fuck around in my neighborhood, I'll call my nephew.
The Natales eventually landed in southwest Philly, a predominantly Irish neighborhood. Natale's young family was the only Italian one on the block, and that suited him just fine. He didn't want his own kids exposed to the toxic lures of the old neighborhood.
I had to move out of South Philly, he says now. I thought, if my sons grow up to be like me, I'll get sick. Sick.
Their new home came their way through the help of young Ralph's capo, legendary local mob killer John Skinny Razor DiTullio, a veteran of the infamous Philly mob war with the Lanzetti brothers before Ralphie was born. DiTullio was one of 10 kids, a typically expansive Italian brood struggling to make ends meet. Food was often leftovers or vegetables with no meat. He stuffed cardboard in the soles of his shoes to keep water from leaking through the holes, and he made his bones in the mob killing of opera great Mario Lanza's nephew. His nickname came from his weapon of choice, a thin, sharp blade typically secreted in the jacket pocket of his suit. DiTullio's mob lineage was impeccable. The old-timer once had a face-to-face meeting with Al Capone, who expressed admiration for DiTullio's killing skills during the Philly infighting of the 20s and 30s.
18, 19 years old, he already had a reputation. Forget about it,
Natale says with admiration.
Capone shook his hand. He told me this one night over scotch. And he told Skinny, there are certain people a year from now, they're not going to be around because of you. Skinny said, oh, I felt so good, like he graduated summa cum laude.
The precocious Natale earned his own street cred before he was old enough to legally drive or buy a drink. DiTullio knew Natale's dad, Spike, from the numbers-running job and took notice of the up-and-comer. The Razor saw a bright future for the teenage hoodlum.
I was starting to make a reputation as a young lad, much faster than anybody ever thought,
Natale remembered of those days.
And Skinny sent for me. I must have been maybe 14. There was an after-hours place on 8th Street, right below Washington Avenue, and a lot of the maid guys used to go there late at night. Skinny had me sitting down in there. He gave me the look. He had a face like a tater, one of those old Mongolians. So I stood up, and he says, Ralphie, come over here. I wouldn't dare sit down. He said, you know Mr. Bruno, of course.
Hello, Mr. Bruno, the kid replied.
I was going to put my hand out, but I stopped.
Natale said of this pivotal get-together.
You learn things by being around. You don't offer your hand to a boss. That's crude. So I waited, and he put his hand out.
Then Bruno spoke.
I heard a lot of good things about you, Ralphie.
Natale offered a quick response. I will never let you hear anything bad about me. Natale recalled wistfully.
He liked that. He said, I know your father. He's a good man, and we expect a lot from you, and so does this man here, Skinny.
Thank you, the awestruck teen replied. It's an honor to meet you this way.
Okay,
Bruno replied before sending the teen on his way.
We'll talk someday.
Hard-Case DiTullio developed an instant soft spot for the young Natale, providing a master's class in the Mafia to his young and ambitious charge. His classroom was the Friendly Tavern on South 8th Street, where Natale proved a particularly apt pupil.
That was the start,
Natale says now.
He took time out of his life to teach me about what you had to be somebody in the family. And he knew I had it. I grew up knowing him. Skinny Razor, he helped all the people in the Italian market. They loved him. He helped them with all their problems, any problem. You do something wrong to them, you're gonna go. He ain't gonna play games.
Natale, when not on the street, worked a few night shifts behind the stick at the Friendly. DiTullio made sure that he got paid for both.
There's no training program like they do in a big company,
he explained of his on-the-job training with Skinny.
When Skinny's there, everybody knew it in the city. That meant he condoned everything that I did before. And you'd better watch out, 'cause I had that license now, and that's how it happened.
And Ralphie paid attention.
I studied men for a long time. Even when I was a little boy, I was always a people watcher. Always.
DiTullio admired Natale's don't-give-a-damn approach to life, going balls to the walls without worries about the fallout and taking responsibility for his actions.
I never was a con artist, said Natale. I never gave a fuck who liked me. That's my life. Skinny loved that more than anybody. Skinny had a little Louis Prima in his voice. He used to say, "Man, you don't care who likes you, do you?" And I said, Natale recounted with a loud laugh, "As long as you like me."
DiTullio survived the local war for control of the mob between the old-school mustache Petes of Sicily and the American-born Young Turks eager to make the family their own. Though himself born in Philly, Skinny Razor was brutally instrumental in keeping the old guard in control. The Young Razor's take-no-prisoners crew included the legendary Harry the Hunchback Riccobini and future capo Freddie Iezzi. Natale offered a poetic appraisal of his friend and mentor.
Skinny Razor was to the Philadelphia La Cosa Nostra what the Great Wall of China was to the enemies of that vast empire.
If you were Skinny Razor's friend, you had a friend for life, and if you were his enemy, that life would be considerably shortened.
We had more arms than an armory under the bar,
Natale recalled. DiTullio's way of handling mob business provided Natale with a template for his own career. He wasn't flashy and never did anything for show. Killing was for business, period. Your reputation speaks for itself. There's no reason to go shouting from the rooftops about anything related to the family or your part in it.
I never tried to impress anybody in my life, says Natale. Maybe when I talked and said things, people responded in a certain way. That's on them. Maybe they got dirty underwear. That's the old saying in the mob. If you don't show up, you got dirty underwear. In other words, you did something wrong. If they make a mistake, they gotta go. You gotta go sometime. You know the old saying, everybody dies.
Natale, as his financial status improved, started dressing in style. He favored tailor-made shirts with a barrel sleeve and double buttons, a nice suit, nothing gaudy, no jewelry, and a hint of cologne. Natale bought into the mob ethos without hesitation, and the Philadelphia family quickly became the epicenter of his existence. He looks back on that choice without regret.
At that time in my life, with those kind of men, it meant more than anything. It meant my whole life. It meant more than my family, because my family will benefit from me being what I am. I didn't have anything. I didn't know anything. I didn't have a formal education. I didn't have a trade. I didn't have nothing. All I had was me. At that time, I weighed 140 pounds. That's all I had. But I knew what I was, and I didn't fear anything in the world. If you die, at least you die good. Hey, I'm somebody. And that's what you feel. And that's what I felt. Just being near that circle of power makes you something better.
The illegal money was good, but Natale still looked forward to the nights when DiTullio handed him a pay envelope after a night of pouring drinks. When the bar closed, the lights in the jukebox were turned down low, and the two men sat and talked about life to a musical backdrop of Ella Fitzgerald and Billy Eckstine. DiTullio did the talking, and Natale listened. I'd say, "What's the matter? You got something on your mind?" And he'd say, "No, I just want to talk." Sometimes we sit for 2 or 3 hours, sip our scotch, and talk about everything. People and life. You'd be surprised the things I learned from him about people. So-called tough guys, and the mob, and this and that. I learned you were a gentleman toward other men and women. And I learned that in this world, there are motherfuckers that you cannot be good to. I'm not talking about criminality. I'm talking about life. Sitting there one night over a glass of good booze, he heard the sad tale of Harry Berry, a fake tough guy with a phony name. He dressed the part and talked the talk and downed the drinks. In the world of Texas ranchers, there's an expression for guys like that. Big hat, no cattle. There's a name for them in South Philly, too. Asshole. The tale was told by Joe Panizzi, the bookie who handled all the bar's betting action. One night in the early 1940s, Barry bopped into a Jersey nightclub with a camel hair coat and an attitude. The rest of the clientele included Philly bigwig and future boss Marco Reginelli and his crew.
Those days Italians would act like they weren't Italians,
Natale explained of Barry's adopted surname.
All the fighters became Irish, different names. All the guys used to go there, eat and drink and this and that. Harry Barry's dressed nice, acting like a dangerous guy. He goes into the bathroom, and the guy who comes in behind him is Marty Martel, the bodyguard of Marco. An old fighter. He says, "You know, Harry, why don't you come over and say hello to the boss over there?" Harry gets snotty when he drinks. What the fuck do I care? I do what I want to do. Harry carried a razor like Skinny did in his suit pocket, covered with a handkerchief. Pulled it out, zoom. He opened Martel's whole face up, blood all over. Then he spit on him and walked out. He carried that scar for his whole life.
Word quickly leaked back to DiTullio about Barry's insolence toward Reginelli and the attack on Martel. The mobster frowned at the idea of people disrespecting his friends and was keeping an eye out for Barry when his target walked into the friendly tavern with a pal. Barry was looking for Panizzi, a gambling savant who kept all his records, point spreads, wins, losses, debts unpaid, in his head. DiTullio and Panizzi were sitting at the bar having a drink. DiTullio leaned over and asked the bookie about Barry's gambling habits. He was betting big, said Panizzi, and was currently a week behind in making good.
Skinny says into Panizzi's ear, "You better collect tonight," recalled Natale. The next morning I was in George Washington Elementary School. There's a crowd around. They said, "Somebody's laying over there. The cops are there." Harry Barry's laying against the steps of a row house, and he's dead. Years later I found out about it because I became somebody. And Panizzi, he was a good friend of my father too, says, "I'm gonna make you laugh with this one. You'd better collect your money tonight."
4. New York, New York. Where are we going? A 20-year-old Ralph Natale asked the question, unsure if he would get an answer.
"Just drive north,"
said his lone passenger, Angelo Bruno, a revered top-level mafioso and Ralph's mob patron,
"to the Holland Tunnel and Little Italy in Manhattan."
Ralphie, who had recently started chauffeuring the boss, started the car and headed silently toward the New Jersey Turnpike.
"He would have all these kiss-asses drive for him," Natale said. "And he said one time, maybe later this week I'm going to go somewhere. You come pick me up in the morning." What he liked about me was I didn't talk too much.
The long, quiet round trip wound resonant for Natale in the years ahead, changing forever the arc of his life and his career.
"We went to a nice little social club in the Italian section of Manhattan," said Natale. "He gets out, and all the men sitting outside get up. He told me, 'Stay out here. I'm going to say hello to somebody in there, and then we're going to go to a hotel.'"
Ralphie, in a sports coat and dress slacks, was ready for anything.
"I knew when you went to New York, look proper."
Bruno emerged and began dictating directions to the hotel. They headed uptown until they arrived at their destination, the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. Natale was stunned.
I thought, what the fuck is he going to the Waldorf Astoria for? We pulled up to the side entrance, not the front. He says, "Okay, put the car there." They had people out there waiting to take my car. Me and Ange went in, past the Peacock Alley, the bar, the Waldorf Astoria, Jesus Christ. It was funny, and he said, "Okay, sit outside, don't go in the bar." I gave him the look. I know better than that. I wouldn't breathe if he didn't tell me it was okay, so I sat down and waited. The waitress came over. "What do you want, young man?" I got a club soda with a slice of lemon. Of course, she knew who I was with.
The Ritzy Park Avenue Hotel held a special place in mob lore. Founding father Charles Lucky Luciano kept a suite in the Waldorf Towers for years, apartment 39C, paying $800 a month. The mafia's ties to the Waldorf continued long after Luciano was deported. The spacious suite was now leased year-round for use by the commission and its members, using the name of a small Queens real estate business. Its owner's parents had lived next door to mob boss Carlo Gambino's cousins in Sicily. The commission used to meet there in the Waldorf. They had a set of rooms under a phony name, Natale recalled. They kept that place for years, and nobody knew. Natale recalled waiting alone for 2 hours, silent and unsure of what was going on. He was starting to get antsy when the elevator doors opened. Bruno exited, but he wasn't alone. Ralphie recognized the second man instantly.
Carlo Gambino,
Natale says of his first encounter with Capo di Tutti Capi, the powerful boss of the nation's most powerful mob family.
My God, I come to attention. I went over. I didn't come right up because that's improper. Angelo says, come here, say hello to Mr. Gambino. He puts his hand out, and he shakes my hand, firm. I looked at his face, and he looked me straight in the eye. I hear many good things about you.
The two bosses from either end of New Jersey were close friends who once hailed from the same hometown in Sicily. Bruno arrived after Gambino, who helped introduce his old friend to the ways of this new world across the Atlantic. Natale recalls the pair as kindred spirits, men of unusual dignity, class, and honor.
They weren't men like John Gotti, the type of guy who walks in, look at me. Neither one of them. You could sense these were men of substance. Angelo adopted the spirit and the manner of Carlo Gambino. Carlo was like an older brother to Angelo. Over the years, they shared different things, legal and illegal.
The two Dons walked back outside with Natale trailing at a respectful distance. Bruno's car was already waiting at the curb.
I'm bewildered,
Natale remembered.
Do they own this place? The waiters knew Gambino. The people at the desk knew him. Ange climbed into the car right away. He was a chain smoker, so I'd have the window open. We start driving.
The ride south was dead silent, with Natale behind the wheel. It wasn't his place to say anything, and so he said nothing. The boss lit cigarette after endless cigarette. The smoke wafting out a window opened just a crack.
He smoked so much I thought I was going to get cancer,
said Natale. Bruno finally broke the hush.
Do you know what that means when that man says that to you?
He asked, a serious look across his face.
Yes, I do,
Natale replied.
And I will always remember that.
Bruno looked directly at his young associate, his eyes turning soft. Natale, despite a childhood devoid of such attention from his own father, recognized the unspoken message of paternal concern on the Philadelphia boss's face.
There are ways men of power have a look that tells you, we're talking to you, but don't think we're friendly here,
Natale said.
But when they soften their eyes, I care for you. I'm looking out for you like a son.
Natale remembered this trip for the rest of his life, and years later his respectful demeanor and boss's support would catapult him into the upper echelon of the mob. Natale crossed paths with the New York City boss at a second meeting. Just as he had at the Waldorf, young Ralphie impressed the older man, who kept the memory with him for years, until the day when he decided the kid from Philly was just the man he needed for a major mob undertaking. 5. The Rise of the Docile Don. Angelo Bruno, the man who became known as the Docile Don, assumed command of the Philadelphia Mafia family in a fashion befitting his nickname. No shooting, no killing, just a peaceful ascension after a successful career. Bruno, after his installation by the mob's ruling commission, spared the life of his rival for the post to earn his nickname of Tranquility. Earlier Philly management changes had come in more spectacular fashion. John Avina was gunned down in the street back in 1936. Things were different when word of boss Marco Reginelli's 1956 death from pancreatic cancer reached the South Philly bars owned and frequented by the city's mafia. The future of each and every one depended on the choice of the new padrone. The Sicilian-born Bruno was the popular choice, but one of only 3 candidates for the top spot in the late 1950s. One was Skinny Razor, who opted for his golf game and his bar business over the headaches of running the family. In mob parlance, DeTullio didn't have the time or inclination to sit with every guy walking into his bar, hat in hand. The other was Joe Ida, already part of the family's ruling elite. But Natale says there was little question that Bruno was the man for the job.
It's simple. He ran the business end when he was a capo. He ran the street, honest to a fault, loyal beyond that. Everything was right. If the money was supposed to be here, it would be here.
Bruno's candidacy was boosted by his close ties to Gambino, head of the New York crime family that bore his name into the new millennium. The pair followed similar career paths in the two East Coast cities, with one major exception. Gambino's ascension to the seat of power followed the brutal murder of Albert Anastasia. Bruno would take a different approach. Ida had different ideas about Reginelli's replacement. No one, the treacherous mobster decided, was better for the job than Joe Ida. The selection process was simple. The Philly Capos would vote on their choice for the new boss. Their pick would be sent to New York, to the commission, the heads of the 5 Big Apple families. The final decision was theirs. Ida decided to fix the election by killing his top competition, Angelo Bruno.
Jealousy, ego, and greed,
said Natale of Ida's twisted mindset. Within hours of Reginelli's death, Ida reached out to a Naples-born shooter named Ignazio Dante and laid out his plot inside the latter's small casino operation on Christian Street. Dante, who had fought alongside DeTullio in the earlier mob war, was promised a higher-ranking family position and a percentage of its illegal income for his cooperation. But Ida had failed to do his homework. When Dante had wanted to retire from the mob's cutthroat world, Bruno had swayed the bosses to set him free. His small casino operated with the full approval of the Philadelphia family.
Normally, noted Natale, a retirement for a soldier of the Mafia is not followed by a Social Security check, but by a hearse.
Bruno had ensured Dante would live long and prosper, and now, as befitting the owner of a gambling operation, he would repay his benefactor in spades. Dante made a beeline for a no-frills Italian restaurant called Corona di Ferra, a compact eatery with a distinctive floor fashioned from diamond-shaped black and white tiles. The same men always seemed to occupy the same half-dozen tables near the bar, but Dante wanted to see the man seated in the main dining room, up 3 steps from the entrance. Angelo Bruno was holding court, with members of his crew at the surrounding tables. Dante respectfully inquired if he should wait at the bar or head inside to speak with Bruno. "He hasn't ordered yet, so do what you please," responded the manager. Dante made his way slowly toward the dining room, offering a smile as he caught the attention of one of Bruno's dinner guests. The guest returned the smile, and Bruno turned to see what prompted the grin. When he spied Dante, the capo offered his own warm smile of greeting.
"Ignazio, here, take a chair," said Bruno.
Dante, using the seat only to brace himself, instead leaned down and whispered into Bruno's ear. "I must speak to you alone. It's a matter of the most serious of things." Bruno took his old friend by the elbow and headed toward the front, with the mafiosi standing in a sign of respect as the two walked out the door for a walk around the block. The pair were now arm in arm, walking almost as one, while Dante laid bare the murder plot proposed by Ida. As Natale heard it, Bruno's face remained a blank slate, not a flash of anger nor a hint of disappointment. The 2 men walked back to the restaurant, where Dante offered an apology to Bruno's table for his interruption.
"I'll get back to you,"
promised Bruno, who then offered his own apology and made an exit, pleading a sudden emergency. A phone call was placed to Gambino in New York, and Bruno, with Capo Freddy Iezzi at the wheel, was on his way to the city within the hour. They headed to the Waldorf, where New York's bosses awaited. Bruno shared the details and received their approval to give Ida what's known as the eternal nap. Instead, the new boss, approved now by the nation's 5 most powerful bosses as the successor to Reginelli, returned to Philadelphia and gave his would-be killer a pass. Joe Ida was deported in 1959, and Angelo Bruno earned his oxymoronic nom de mafia by sparing his life. There was one other change. The South Jersey faction of the Philadelphia family would report to Bruno from now on, a change from the old days when the city and its suburbs answered to 2 different leaders. Bruno was already showing one of the main attributes for successfully running a family, ensuring its stability in times of unrest. Before leaving the Waldorf, Gambino pulled Bruno aside for a short primer on his new life as a Don. The 2 sat at a table, a plate of the Waldorf's finest china filled with biscotti and espresso between them, as Gambino explained that job 1 was choosing the right underboss. The 2 spoke in Sicilian, like a father advising his son. Bruno lit a cigarette as he listened intently to the advice. "Choose someone without ties to anyone else," Gambino declared, "without a history that might cloud the vision that Bruno would impart about the Philadelphia family. You must be his mentor in all things, so only you can show him us," Gambino explained. "Only you can impart what you want him and your family to feel about La Cosa Nostra. This is most important." Bruno headed back to Philadelphia with the advice already ingrained into his thoughts going forward. Bruno had Iezzi drive him directly to the Friendly Tavern, where he would share the news of his good fortune with Skinny Razor, his friend and fellow traveler through the life since both were 19. Bruno's decision only reinforced to Iezzi that New York had made the right choice.
The smart move, according to Sicilian philosophy, is when forming a family of your own, you must first align yourself with the strongest capos as your foundation, Natale explained. Angie's decision told everybody in the family that there would be no dissent over New York's decision, and it would also make anyone think twice about opposing the decision, given Skinny's expertise in making people disappear.
Iezzi, a DeTullio pal since the old mob war, didn't need directions. The driver parked on Washington Street, near the front entrance to the bar. Skinny's personal bodyguard, Lefty Gatti, heard the sound of an engine and bolted immediately toward the front door as Iezzi exited the Lincoln town car.
"You know what to do,"
said Bruno. And after a lifetime of knowing what to do, Iezzi headed toward the front door.
"I'll wait by the side door,"
Bruno added before slipping away. What happened next was instructive. While many bosses like to make an ostentatious entrance, basking in the love and fear of their minions, Bruno had an aversion to such grandstanding. So on the night of his ascension, the humble Bruno opted for a back entrance to the bar.
He held himself with dignity and humility as he should, coming to tell a man who could easily have been as honored as he was,
Natale recalled. Iezzi went in through the front, looking for DeTullio. Gatti greeted him warmly, with a smile and a handshake. DeTullio saw the pair and waved to Iezzi to join him at the bar. Iezzi asked quietly if Gatti could open the side door, because Angelo Bruno was waiting outside. DeTullio took the keys and stood up.
"I'll let my friend in myself."
The two men embraced wordlessly, and with one look, each knew exactly how their upcoming conversation would play out. No rancor or jealousy or treachery was in either one's mind. It was a moment of triumph and joy for the family and the two old friends. A bar patron pumping money into the jukebox first noticed Bruno's arrival. By the time the new Don and Skinny Razor walked toward the table in the farthest end of the bar, everyone inside was staring at the two revered mobsters. Then they stood in a show of respect as Bruno offered a wave with his left arm. Bruno rarely drank in public, occasionally enjoying a cocktail while out with his wife, his capos, and their wives at a Thursday night dinner that became a family tradition under the docile Don. But on this night he ordered a Canadian club straight up, with Pellegrino water on the side. He then bought the bar around before leaning over to speak with DeTullio in a low whisper.
"John,"
said the new boss,
"you were the first to know in Philadelphia. We've just come back from New York, and the commission named me as Marco's successor, and has combined us all together, South Jersey with us. We're all under one flag."
DeTullio rose to his feet, raising his glass of scotch high to pledge his allegiance. It was an oath that the old warrior took more seriously than anything else in his life. "I am yours, and my entire crew is yours to command," he announced. "It will be so until I die. Salute!" Now Bruno stood, kissing his trusted capo on the cheek.
"I'm honored to have your loyalty, your life, and the lives of all of your men."
Bruno became the kind of boss who made regular visits to long-retired Don Turiddu Sabella with free cartons of cigarettes and other gifts. A decade earlier, Bruno did the old boss another service, according to the FBI. He was involved in the South Philly execution of a man spreading rumors that Sabella was cheating on his wife with a neighborhood woman. The dead man was found face down in the gutter, 3 bullets in his skull. The killers were never found, although Natale knows who pulled the trigger, his old pal DeTullio. Bruno gained a reputation as a man who treated his men fairly, affording them respect both personally and financially. As a boy, young Ralph already knew who Bruno was.
Skinny told me, Ange will never do anything wrong, never. He's that kind of a man. It's a simple thing. When Ange would walk into a bar, everybody would stand up, everybody.
DeTullio was just as quick to vouch for Natale with the new boss.
Skinny told him, whenever I'm on vacation, in the hospital or sick or whatever, there's only one guy who will do what you ask. Fast, without talking, without anything. All you gotta do is tell him. And that's Ralph,
Natale said. When DeTullio filled Natale in on the commission's endorsement of Bruno, the protégé had just one question for his mentor.
Is that what you want?
The older man leaned over and kissed Natale, and the two raised their glasses of scotch in a toast to Bruno and the future. Natale, like most in South Philly, grew up hearing about the legendary Bruno. As a kid, Ralph hung out at the corner of 6th Street and Manton Street. The neighborhood would buzz when the Philadelphia Capo came cruising through the neighborhood with his driver at the wheel.
Always in an old beat-up Chevy. An old car,
Natale recalled of the drive-bys.
He was affable for a mob boss. He was one of those guys, when we were 13, 14 years old, he'd pass by and make the guys stop and beep the horn. The kids would yell, "Hey, Mr. Bruno!"
When Bruno chose an underboss, he followed the sage counsel of Gambino to the letter. Within a week, Iezzi was driving the new padrone to the Italian market for a meeting with Phil Testa. Testa came to Bruno's attention through one of Natale's pinpoints in time, where what a man is and what he will become are forever altered in a few unexpected minutes, often without warning. The Chicken Man, as he was known, was butchering a pair of hens for a customer when the sound of loud voices came from an adjoining shop. Testa, the bloody butcher's knife still in hand, came to his neighbor's aid. Once inside the fish store, Testa spied local extortionist Paulie Tropea with a revolver pointed at its owner, a pal of the Sicilian-born Testa's. The Chicken Man plunged the blade into Tropea's side and simultaneously kicked the gunman's right leg out from under him. Blood spewed like a geyser. Testa and his pal dragged Tropea's corpse outside and left him on the sidewalk. The other Sicilian business owners turned their heads in a silent message. We didn't see anything. Testa told the businessman to call the cops and report that Tropea was stabbed outside the store by a black man who fled. Natale recalls blaming such violence on an unidentified black guy was almost a neighborhood tradition among the insular Italians. The local homicide cops
knew the answer before they asked the question,
said Natale.
But as a matter of policy, they asked anyway.
The Black Mafia, an African-American group operating in a minority neighborhood, eventually turned the oft-repeated line on its head. When asked about murders in their sphere of influence, they developed a stock answer. It looked like a couple of Italians did it. Either way, the cops found collars were hard to come by. Word soon spread along 9th Street of Testa's bold move. Eventually, the talk made its way to Angelo Bruno. 1 year earlier, family capo Freddy Iezzi had touted Testa as a candidate for La Cosa Nostra. He was inducted in the usual ritual, sharing his blood finger to finger in a dark cellar on Mercy Street in South Philly. Testa was assigned to the Bruno crew.
And so, the second life of Phil Testa began,
Natale observed. When Bruno arrived at the Italian market seeking Testa as his number 2 man, it was a major event. The new dawn of the Philadelphia Mafia walking among his fellow Sicilians. This was their new godfather, the man they would seek out in times of need or in want of a favor. Bruno walked purposefully past the small businesses, headed for the butcher's shop, and looked his new underboss in the eyes. The selection didn't sit well with at least one made man, Anthony Tony Bananas Caponegro, who considered the decision a snub. Based in Newark, the mob killer showed a loyal face to the new boss and his number 2 man, but an undercurrent of anger would fester for 2 decades before finally exploding. 6. Mob Heavyweights. One night in late February 1964, Skinny Razor sat with Natale at the bar of the Friendly Tavern and told him the eye-opening tale of the Cassius Clay-Sonny Liston fight, its rematch, and the reach of organized crime into the highest level of professional sports. By 1964, Sonny Liston was not only the heavyweight boxing champion of the world, he was the undisputed biggest and baddest motherfucker on planet Earth, both terrifying and devastating. He never learned to read or write as a child, and once recalled that the only thing my father ever gave me was a beating. After turning pro in 1953, it was Sonny handing out the beatings as he won 33 of his first 34 bouts. The ex-con learned to box while behind bars, coming from nothing to seize the championship belt in stunning style. He battered the preceding champion, nice guy Floyd Patterson, into submission in 2 one-sided bouts, much to the horror of Middle America and many ring aficionados. The first fight, on September 25, 1962, lasted all of 126 seconds before Liston knocked the champ out. The rematch 10 months later took just 17 seconds longer, with the same brutal result: Liston by knockout. The world of sport now realizes it has gotten Charles "Sonny" Liston to keep, wrote Los Angeles Times sports columnist Jim Murray. It is like finding a live bat on a string under your Christmas tree. Liston's rise through the ranks was aided by one of Philadelphia's own, Frank "Blinky" Palermo, the notorious mob fixer of the fight game. The fighter signed on with manager Joe "Pep" Barone, who was linked with Palermo and his equally disreputable partner, New York mobster Frankie Carbo, known in mob circles as the Man in Gray, reflecting the color of his suits. His mob palette included various other shades, including working as a hitman.
"He killed Benjamin Bugsy Siegel," Ralph said. "Not his girlfriend Virginia Hill's brother or anybody else. The mob sent Frankie Carbo. Killed him. The guy who gave him up was that little weasel Jew Myalansky. Said, 'You can do what you want, he's crazy.' He gave Siegel up."
Palermo and Carbo controlled some fighters directly and others more surreptitiously. Fights were famously fixed, as Jake LaMotta wrote in his biography, and the mob money routinely rolled in.
"The Gambinos in Philadelphia own professional boxing together,"
said Natale. Carbo once boasted of exercising absolute control of the welterweight division for a full quarter-century. Everyone and everything in the world of boxing operated within their orbit, as lightweight Ike Williams attested.
"See these eyes?" he once asked. "These aren't even my real eyes. Blinky robbed me blind."
The city of brotherly love became the surly Liston's adopted hometown as he pounded his way to the top of the fight game. His sparring partners occasionally included Natale's driver, Frankie Vidino, Ralphie's suit of armor, his army of one.
"He stayed with us in Philadelphia," Natale recalled. "Blinky got him a nice apartment, this, that, got him everything. You know, he was a big heroin user, but when he was training, he'd stop and try to get ready. He was on it since he was young. A shame. Nice guy. He looked like a bear. He could fight 10 guys. I mean, tremendous puncher. And he could take a punch."
Liston's next opponent was a brash young Olympic gold medalist by the name of Cassius Clay, soon to be Muhammad Ali, renowned under either name as much for his trash talk as his estimable skills inside the ring. A Liston victory over the young loudmouth was generally considered a fait accompli.
"He could beat 3 Muhammad Alis at once in the ring. That's Sonny Liston,"
was Natale's assessment. By the time of the fight, Palermo and Carbo were behind bars after a conviction for trying to muscle in on welterweight champion Don Jordan. The duo were found guilty in 1961 of ordering a beatdown on a California promoter in their bid to seize control of Jordan's career, with Carbo warning the victim that the mob would tear out his eyeballs. But their reach was hardly limited by their jail time, as the world was about to learn.
"There came a time when Liston was getting heavy with the heroin in between fights," recalled Natale. "Instead of withdrawing, he's using all the time now. We knew the guys who were selling the heroin, but you couldn't stop them. You bury 2 of them and 10 take their place. They're like cockroaches. So they're getting ready for this Liston fight with Ali, and they sent word from New York. We're going to make the score of a lifetime, because you never know when he's going to OD, this guy. He's a commodity they don't want to lose. Sonny Liston, heavyweight champion. If he dies, They don't get nothing. Everything is business, so he's got to take a dive. He's got to dump. Whatever he does, he can't beat Ali.
On February 25th, 1964, the glowering Liston stood in his corner to face the motormouth from Louisville, Kentucky. The fight was held in Miami Beach, Florida, with Clay expected to land in roughly the same spot on the canvas as Patterson, and in about the same short amount of ring time. The betting odds reflected that sentiment.
The opening price in Vegas was 10-1,
recalled Natale.
Then it dropped to 8-1. Only the bosses knew what was going down.
Disaster nearly struck when Clay, his eyes blinded by some unidentified substance, nearly refused to come out for the fifth round. Trainer Angelo Dundee shoved his fighter back in the ring, and the bout continued as mob bosses from coast to coast exhaled deeply. Clay triumphed when Liston conceded from his corner, sitting on a stool and spitting out his mouthguard before the seventh round. Rumors of a fix began floating immediately. The FBI investigated. Nothing was ever proven, but John DiTullio knew the truth, as told to him by Angelo Bruno. On the night after the stunning TKO, Skinny Razor asked Natale to stick around for one of their late-night talks in the quiet confines of his bar. There, with the jukebox jazz as their soundtrack, he laid out the whole scenario for his protege. DiTullio, after telling the entire incredible tale, explained his motivation for sharing the story.
Skinny says, "I'm telling you this because I want you to know. Things can be done like this. We made the biggest score of a lifetime, legitimately, on this fight. We all took cash as Clay,"
Natale recalled.
"And throughout the country it was done. They all bet big. Not my business how much, but they made a fortune on it. All the top people from Chicago to Milwaukee, New York, Cleveland. They took care of Sonny. They might have gave him $600,000, $700,000. He's gonna blow it all on heroin anyway, the bum."
Incredibly, the once-in-a-lifetime mob windfall repeated itself. There would be a rematch.
"They started salivating again,"
said Natale. The immediate problem was that Liston declared that he intended to exact revenge on Clay, much to the consternation of his mob handlers.
"They told him, 'You can't win,'" Natale related. "He said, 'I'll knock him deep.' Frankie Carbo sent word, 'I ain't killed a man in a long time, but I'll kill you.' And that was the end of that. He threw the other fight, too."
The second fight was moved to remote Lewiston, Maine, with a mere 2,434 people in attendance, the smallest crowd ever for a heavyweight title fight. The obscure rematch location was no accident.
"Who's going to bother them there? In Lewiston, Maine?"
Natale asked archly.
"And he threw it twice."
Less than 2 minutes into round one, the once invincible Liston collapsed to the canvas from a blow that nobody saw. Ali's infamous phantom punch. The new champ, in an iconic photo, stood victorious over his vanquished foe, unaware of the mafia-orchestrated backstory that came with his title belt. He was blissfully unaware of the circumstances surrounding his two not-so-stunning upsets.
"They paid him again, Liston," said Natale. "And they loaded up. They made a fortune, they really did. And Frank Blinky Palermo was instrumental in the whole thing because he had the reins. It happened that way."
There was no happy ending for Liston, who was found dead in his Las Vegas home on January 5th, 1971. Despite the mysterious circumstances surrounding Sonny's demise, Natale remains certain the cause of death.
"He OD'd. If the mob had killed him, I would have heard about it. He loved heroin."
7. Doing the work. The tale of Sonny Liston and the multi-million-dollar haul was not the stuff of the mob's day-to-day operations. Natale moved comfortably through that world, working as Bruno's mob Mr. Fix-It in the 1960s. One day, a problem arose with a couple of porno shops/peep shows operating on Market Street. The two businesses belonged to a man from New York, the well-dressed and well-respected Robert DiBernardo. Dib, as he was known to his friends, was a huge moneymaker for the Gambino family, becoming the king of mob porn and peep shows, including part ownership of the notorious Show World Center just off Times Square. Bruno, after a call from his friend Carlo Gambino, gave Dib the go-ahead to open a peep show in Philadelphia. Both mob dons received a taste of the profits, and business was good. Then, as Natale recalled it, a local biker gang showed up.
They went in there and they said they ran all the girl dancers and started shaking the owners down, Natale said. So Carlo Gambino, he's paying Ange. You're supposed to take care of these things. Gambino wants to know what's going on.
Bruno reached out to his legitimate business partner, Long John Martirano, who grabbed a pal and headed down to Market Street.
You know what they tell him? Go fuck yourself. The girls belong to us. We don't give a fuck who sent you. We gotta get some money out of this. They sent another guy. They told him, get the fuck away from us.
Natale remembered.
Now Ange tells Long John, get the Chinaman.
That was Bruno's nickname for Natale.
He said, your face, I couldn't tell if you were happy or unhappy or whatever,
Natale recalled with a chuckle.
And I called him the chief. Nobody else was allowed to do that.
Bruno's directions were simple. The bikers were making him look bad with his friend in New York. Take care of it. Natale couldn't resist the chance to tweak the chief.
I said, didn't you already send those other guys up there? He knew I liked to give it to him every once in a while. I always told him the same thing. Give me 2 weeks and it will be done. What do you want me to say, 2 days? 2 weeks. And somebody was found shot in a car, shot or whatever. The bikers, they moved out. Completely.
A delighted Dib invited Natale to Little Italy for the annual Feast of San Gennaro, a mob-run street party. The Gambino capo offered to cover all expenses. Natale, never a fan of the New York families, tried unsuccessfully to stay home.
Ange knew how I felt about these New Yorkers. They're never around for you. Plus, it cost you $400 to park in New York, even then, Natale recalled. They all think that driving a green car is bad luck, and I drove a green Buick.
But he soon found himself in a darkened Little Italy restaurant, shaking hands with the grateful Mr. DiBernardo. They ate and drank a bit, and then Dib invited Natale for a walk through the neighborhood. It was time to put away the cannoli and talk turkey.
He says, you know my principal business. Would you like to get into that? I could set you up. You don't need anything. I've got the studios, I've got everything, recalled Natale, who had never even been inside a peep show booth. I was doing so good at that time, I said I appreciated it, but I did what I did for you-know-who, and I'd do it again if he asked. I never mentioned Bruno's name in my lifetime. He says, if you ever change your mind, you let me know.
Dib later made headlines when his name surfaced in the 1984 presidential race, with allegations that he rented space from vice presidential candidate Geraldine Ferraro's husband. 2 years later, Dib was murdered on orders from Gambino family boss John Gotti. The Philly Peep Show operation was, in the grand scheme of the mafia, small potatoes. Bruno and Gambino, it turned out, had much bigger fish to fry in Atlantic City. 8. Where the sand is turning to gold. By the 1960s, once proud Atlantic City was reeling. The easy money was long gone. The boardwalk was seedy. The future was as bleak as a December sky over the waves crashing on the Atlantic shoreline. The truth was undeniable. The seaside resort was now little more than Bayonne with a beach. But the city had long provided a haven for the mob, going back to the days of bootlegging and the stewardship of Enoch "Nucky" Johnson, a visionary whose exploits became fodder for the HBO show Boardwalk Empire. To mafia men with the same foresight, rumors of legalized gambling in Atlantic City sounded like thousands of cash registers ringing. Few could see the future more clearly than Carlo Gambino, the head of the nation's most powerful mob family, the New York Borgata that bore his name. He presciently conjured dollar signs among the desolation. In 1966, Bruno was called to the Ferrara Bakery and Cafe, a pasticceria in Little Italy, to discuss the future with his friend and mafia mentor Gambino. The scent of anise and lemon floated in the air as the two men of substance and power sat amid the regulars ordering their cappuccinos and Italian pastries. The pair shared espresso and a plate of biscotti. Two octogenarian men sitting nearby recognized Gambino. They discreetly took off their caps and lowered their eyes in recognition. Gambino offered a gracious smile in response before getting down to business. The topic was the decrepit shorefront city under control of the Philadelphia family. Word had reached Gambino, through Wall Street-connected lawyers working for his sons Thomas and Joseph, that a quiet but steady drumbeat had started for casino gambling in Atlantic City. There was no timetable, but Gambino, though no Boy Scout, was always prepared. The wheels were set in motion to ensure the Mafia would land on the ground floor of the new casinos rising on the boardwalk. With Bruno on board, Gambino broached the idea of bringing in the Chicago family, the outfit, as it was known, the mob birthed in blood by Al Capone. The family was experienced in the ways of unions and legalized gambling from decades entrenched in Las Vegas. It was Gambino, not Bruno, who suggested Natale could be of service in the mob's new enterprise. Gambino spoke in a whisper, leaning forward so the conversation would remain between the two of them.
Angelo, a few years ago you had a young man meet with me in my son's office at the trucking company. I think his name was Natale. You made a comment about this young man that I put here, pointing to his head. For such a time as now, am I mistaken?
Bruno smiled at the mention of his young friend and the encyclopedic memory of his older one.
Yes, Carlo. You don't forget too much, do you?
Gambino broached Natale's name for a position in Local 170 of the Bartenders Union, giving the mob a legitimate foothold when the new Atlantic City opened for business. Gambino said the two East Coast bosses needed to send an emissary to the Windy City, where the mighty Tony Accardo ruled and ran the mob-controlled unions. His nickname, Joe Batters, came from a penchant for applying a Louisville slugger on the heads of those who ran afoul of his rule.
This young man of yours,
Gambino said in measured tones,
might be the one.
Bruno was immediately aware of the enormity of this discussion. 3 families working together to make a fortune from casinos that did not now exist, even on some architect's drawing board. Yet he unhesitatingly jumped in with both feet.
Ralphie has my complete trust,
he answered firmly.
His loyalty shall be shared by you and me when we send him to our friends in Chicago as our man.
Gambino agreed, and so it was, over coffee, in a restaurant on Grand Street, that the mob began carving up Atlantic City before the first foundation was poured. The decision, though it would bear bitter fruit for both families in the ensuing decades, seemed a stroke of genius on this day. Gambino would handle the arrangements with Chicago. Natale recalled how Bruno broke the news to him.
Ange told me that Gambino, he remembered me. He was a wise old man. He remembered that Ange told him, this guy would kill for me, without question and without causing a furor. And Gambino said, don't you think we should send him to Chicago? Then we met, me, Angelo Bruno, and Carlo Gambino, before I went to Chicago. We made a pact. This is till the day we die, the 3 of us. And they sent word to Chicago. This is not just Ange, it's Bruno and Gambino that I represent. Nobody ever got that part. How do they think I got there? Because I'm handsome? I'm not bad looking, but 6 feet tall I'm not.
The promotion came with an unexpected bonus. Natale would become a made man. He had rejected the offer before, but this time it was made directly by Gambino and Bruno.
Skinny Razor had asked me if I wanted to get made, Natale recounted. I told him, you're gonna get me killed, don't do that, because I really didn't like a lot of skippers in the family. I knew I would get in trouble because their word is the rule, and Skinny told me, Ange knows who you are and what you are. That was good enough for me. I had the best of everything because I was a part of it, but I didn't have to answer to anybody. That wasn't for me. Oh, Skipper, here I am. You know what I'm saying? I wasn't going to do it if they put me under somebody besides Skinny Razor, and he had a small crew.
But this time it was the proverbial offer that Natale couldn't refuse, membership as a made man by direct invitation from his boss and the most powerful mafioso in the United States. The highly unusual ceremony, attended by just the 3 men, was held in a Gambino-controlled building inside Manhattan's Garment District.
Ange and Carlo got together and they told me, don't tell anybody about this.
Natale remembered of that day.
We pricked our fingers and put our blood together. Carlo Gambino told me, you belong to me now, and you belong to Ange. Of course, I was honored.
For Natale, it was the unexpected pinnacle of his life in organized crime.
I left there feeling like I was untouchable. I felt like I could do anything for my wife and family that I ever wanted to do. I felt almost invincible.
But the newly made man had work to do. Within weeks, Natalia was winging west to meet with Ed Miller, the president of the Hotel Employees and Restaurant Employees International Union. The occasion was a convention called in the city where Accardo reigned supreme.
Carlo Gambino always believed in acting swiftly,
Natalia explained. He arrived, as instructed, at the Sherman Hotel in downtown Chicago and waited in his room for a phone call. When it came, union official Phil Valley, who was tied both to Chicago and to Milwaukee boss Frank Mr. Big Balistrieri, was down in the lobby. Valley said he was coming upstairs. Natalia hung up and waited. A soft knock came, and Natalia, more out of habit than anything else, peered through the peephole. He opened the door, and Ralph Natalia's future walked into the room. The two men shook hands and exchanged pleasantries before heading downstairs to meet with Miller at the hotel bar. Natalia was dressed more like an English banker than a mob killer. Dark blue pinstripe suit, solid burgundy tie over a white-on-white shirt, a pair of highly polished Allen Edmonds shoes on his feet.
"You look like you're supposed to look,"
Valley declared, after sizing up the 5'6" Natalia. The Sherman's cocktail lounge featured a huge horseshoe-shaped bar, flanked by tables filled with conventioneers. Valley steered Natalia through the crowd to the spot at the bar where Miller held court, surrounded by his own retinue of sycophants, hanging on his every word. Natalia approached slowly, waiting for an invitation from Miller and a show of respect for the union head. Natalia would only speak once spoken to.
"Who am I to walk up when he's talking to one of the vice presidents?"
Natalia said of his respectful reticence.
"You should never approach a man of power, or a dangerous man, quickly. I learned that young."
Miller, once a union leg-breaker, had worked his way up through the ranks to his current lofty position. As Natalia hung back, Valley and Miller spoke. Valley finally gestured for Natalia to join them.
I am Ed Miller,
the man declared in a whiskey rasp.
I know who you are.
The introduction was followed by a smile and a firm handshake that spoke volumes to Natalia about the man, who was 4 decades his senior. Decades later, he recalled looking into Miller's eyes.
They had seen it all. He was the real deal.
Natalia knew immediately he was in the presence of a kindred spirit. Miller asked if Natalia wanted a drink.
"I'll have what you're drinking, Mr. Miller," he replied respectfully. "It has a great aroma."
Miller summoned the barkeep.
"Dutch, give everyone fresh drinks, and give me and my young friend here a couple of Bushmills straight up with water chasers so we can converse intelligently."
The two raised their glasses in a toast before any business began.
"I felt a comfort drinking with Miller, like I had known him forever," Natalia said. "I knew that I and this old cowboy from Kansas City would talk, and everything would be as the 3 old men,
Gambino, Accardo, and Bruno,
would want it to be."
The next day, Natalia was appointed as a special international union organizer, with powers to negotiate contracts everywhere and anywhere. The mob stars had aligned, and the future of Atlantic City, for better or worse, was a done deal for the 3 crime families. All they had to do now was wait, and wait they did, patiently, for a full decade. In November 1974, the voters of New Jersey rejected a referendum to legalize gambling in the dilapidated shore resort. 2 years later, by a slim measure, the vote went the other way. Atlantic City's first casino, Resorts International, opened its doors on May 26, 1978. In the interim, Natalia became head of Local 170 in the late 60s, earning a modest $18,500 a year plus another $1,500 for his work with the International. Despite the 5-figure on-the-books salary, he owned a $45,000 4-bedroom home in Pennsauken, New Jersey, and a second home in Palm Springs, California. Natalia also boasted a $100,000 condo that he considered an investment. His reach soon included virtually all the union locals on the East Coast.
"I liked it right away,"
he said of the union job.
"We took that union over in New Jersey. I told them, 'Who's your lawyer? How much does he charge you?' He was on a retainer of $1,000 a month, plus whatever he does he's charging us extra. I said, "Give me all the contracts. We're done with them. Now call him on the phone." I told him, "We can't afford you." And then I made my own contracts up, just following what he did. What am I, a moron?
Ralph and Lucia enjoyed the perks of his new gig. In contrast to the future Genovese family boss Vincent the Chin Gigante, who spent most of his life without leaving the crowded Greenwich Village streets where he was born and raised, Natale traveled far and wide on the Union's dime. Miami, Belle Harbor, Florida, San Francisco, Hawaii. Speaker of the House Tip O'Neill once popped in for a drink at the Palm Springs house. Natale loved the horses, and he would take Lucia to the venerable Saratoga racetrack in the summer to watch the races and the people.
I did union work in Boston, Detroit, Milwaukee, California, any place I had to go and take care of business, he explained. I was welcomed everywhere by the bosses and capos. It was a great thing.
The Natales traveled to a Teamsters convention in Honolulu, where they checked into a nice Sheraton hotel. Natale was given a ceremonial position at the event so he could pocket a few extra bucks each day. He then headed to the host hotel, a Hilton overlooking the sparkling blue waters of the Pacific Ocean, to check in with union boss Ed Hanley. As Lucia did some island shopping, Hanley was outraged that the Natales weren't staying in the Hilton.
I said it was just too crowded. I couldn't get a room over there, Ralph said. He told one of his stooges, "Call up the Sheraton, go over there and pick everything up and bring it over here now."
Problem solved. Life was good, and getting better all the time. Before long, Natale had a face-to-face meeting with the nation's most powerful union boss, Teamsters President James Riddle Hoffa. The get-together was arranged by Anthony Provenzano, known to one and all as Tony Pro, and to a select few as a capo in the Genovese family. Provenzano ran the powerful Teamsters Local 560 based in Union City, New Jersey, and was part of Hoffa's inner circle.
Tony asked me, "Would you like to meet him?" Natale recalled. "Just take a plane to Detroit. We'll set it up."
Hoffa and Natale became fast friends, sharing a mutual admiration that transcended their profitable business relationship. They shared a similar view of life, a good sense of humor, and a particular bluntness in conversation.
"A man's man," Natale recalled. "He didn't have anything else besides the union. I always said he didn't drink, he didn't chase women. He was a complete power, controlled all the transit from coast to coast. I respected him so much as a man."
Once Natale reached the Motor City, he received a call with details about the time and place for their initial encounter.
"I didn't know Detroit, so they had to tell me where to go," he said. "I walked in and he looked so good. Jimmy Hoffa with some of his men. He was a real man, a smart man, a wise man. We shook hands, and of course I waited for him to speak first. What he said was simple. You wouldn't be here unless you were the man I was told you are. And I'm told you know what to do, and how to do it."
Natale didn't need an interpreter, and replied,
"I'm here for you. If you think you can't depend on me, then I shouldn't go back to Philadelphia."
His reply carried an unspoken message.
What I was saying was, if you can't trust me, you should kill me. He knew what I meant. And he said, "Okay, now you can have anything you need, credit cards, money, whatever." From then on, I was there whenever he needed me, for whatever he needed me for.
The first order of business was a problem with a union local in Ralph's hometown.
"I always have problems in Philadelphia," Hoffa said. "Would you mind if I ask my friends here and your friend over there? If I have little problems, can I send for you and explain something to do?"
The friends involved were the Detroit mob and Bruno.
"He never mentioned names, Jimmy,"
Natale recalled.
"I said, why not? If my friend says okay, he's my chief. And Jimmy depended on me, and I liked that. I never said how much, who, why, where. He'd give me a nice envelope, and I never got less than $50,000. And that was a lot of money at that time."
Things went on from there.
We laughed and we talked. He told me, "Anything you want, you feel free to come straight to me. And if there's something really important, I'll come see you in New Jersey." I mentioned the names of a few of my good friends, and he told me, "I already called them. You have the recommendation of Tony Pro."
Natale recalled one of his first assignments from Hoffa.
Somebody had a problem in the brewery down in Philadelphia, Schmitz. They were looking to buy this and that there, and Ange, of course, said, "Ralphie, handle this." Do what you have to do over there.
Natale did as he was told and earned Hoffa's enduring respect. Without going into too much detail, Natale recalled taking a phone call directly from the union boss to handle another bit of business. He said,
"Come and see me. I have a little problem, and maybe we can fix it." I was on a plane to Detroit within the hour. In a couple of weeks, problem solved. He took care of me handsomely, and whenever he called, I answered.
According to Natale, Hoffa had a unique relationship with the mafia families from coast to coast.
He was connected with a mob in every city, but they never owned him, Natale said with admiration. They couldn't tell him what to do. They didn't own him.
Natale's involvement with Local 170 actually predated his role in Atlantic City and his work for Hoffa. In the late 50s, a housing boom in South Jersey produced a sudden influx of new entrepreneurs eager to serve the growing population with restaurants and nightclubs. The venerable Latin Casino, the Philly stop for such stars as Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin, pulled up stakes on Walnut Street in the city and headed to Route 70 in Cherry Hill. The change in demographics would, as so many things did, offer the Philadelphia underworld a sparkling new revenue stream. The employees at these new businesses became members of Local 170, then under the command of Joe Seidman and Sam Rifkin, two men with friends of their own. Unlike most unions, this one appeared more concerned with the business owners than the rank and file, cutting a series of sweetheart deals that benefited the businesses and the two local leaders more than the membership. Unfortunately for Seidman and Rifkin, workers moving from the Philly Union to Local 170 soon became acutely aware of the difference in the way things operated on the Jersey side of the Walt Whitman Bridge. The money was less, and the health benefits were meager. A group of dissidents grew, headed by a pair of waiters from Philly and a Cherry Hill bartender. They were soon appearing at every union meeting and nominating their own slate of candidates to run the show. A loss would mean the end of the cash-stuffed envelopes for Seidman and Rifkin that came once a month from the local businesses and the Cadillac Linen Company, two groups brought together by the union. Both of those groups belonged to Philly's Jew mob, headed by a pair of contract killers once aligned with Louis Lepke Buchalter's infamous Murder, Inc. A change in leadership would hit the pair directly in their wallets, as the dissidents soon learned. The challengers decided they would not back down, but instead recruited some muscle of their own. Two ex-amateur boxers who once worked as strong-arm organizers for the Teamsters. Richard "Bucky" Baldino and Joe McGreal were summoned by the dissident leaders. Baldino, a man of fierce reputation, suggested they needed a third man, his old boyhood friend Ralph Natale, currently aligned with the DeTullio crew of the Bruno family. Baldino reasoned, quite accurately, that Natale was the man they needed if their takeover bid should run afoul of the Jew mob. The challengers triumphed overwhelmingly in the election. Seidman and Rifkin were out, and the new leadership was suddenly in, too deep as it turned out. Natale recalled election night as
a gush of fresh blood in the ocean with a couple of great white sharks circling nearby.
The sharks were McGreal and Natale, but before they would eat, Natale had to make things right with Philly's two top Jewish gangsters, men of great repute, and a pair of stone killers. A luncheon get-together was arranged, with Natale heading to the rival mob's home turf. The two hulking men at the front door of Rose Lynchick's restaurant greeted Natale and his driver by name, though neither recognized the pair. The restaurant was closed for the day, but opened specifically to welcome the Italian visitors entering off the narrow stretch of Quince Street. Driver Frankie Vadino was ordered to wait downstairs, while Natale headed to the private dining room where Willie Weisberg and Cappy Hoffman awaited. The two were the heads of the local Jew mob, legends of the Philadelphia underworld, and one-time contract killers for Murder, Inc. Natale was well aware that through the years the two had hosted many last meals in this very spot for unwitting victims. Before heading upstairs, Natale spoke to his driver. "Frankie, if you hear shots from upstairs, open up on whoever you're with and screw. Don't worry about me. I'll already be dead." The driver nodded, and Natale started up the staircase. He was at peace with whatever happened.
If that's what it's supposed to be, it's too late now to be scared.
Thoughts of prior lunches when Angelo Bruno and he summoned a poor unfortunate to a meal that ended in murder drifted through his mind. When Natale reached the landing upstairs, two men who looked more like tailors than hitmen awaited. Weisberg greeted him with the question, "Are you armed?" Ralphie knew better than to lie. He never blinked or hesitated.
"Yes, I am."
"Ralphie," declared a smiling Hoffman, "I would do the same thing coming to lunch with us two old gangsters." With the mood lightened, owner Rose Lynchick headed to their table to take a lunch order.
"They say the chicken soup here is to die for,"
deadpanned Natale as the tension in the room dissipated. Weissman quickly got down to business, noting that previous union heads Seidman and Rifkin were generous business partners through the years. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the soup, accompanied by a basket of dark bread and a slab of unsalted butter. "Eat and be well," the owner advised Natale, who was by now fairly certain that he would do both. Weissman grabbed a piece of the bread, smeared it with butter, and said, "You eat, Ralphie, and I'll talk. Angelo told me that he said only this to you, that we were his friends long before any unions."
"That's true,"
Natale responded evenly. Weissman continued speaking as Natale kept eating. Finally, with the chicken soup gone, the younger man felt that he could resolve the issues at hand.
"What you and Cappy has stays the same, and if we could get more for you, I'll make sure it will get done. My respect for you and Cappy doesn't come down to dollars and cents. The both of you were gangsters when I was peeing off curbs. Nothing changes."
All three men stood, exchanging smiles before shaking hands. They came from different eras, Natale reflected, but they were men cut from the same cloth. The Philadelphia family was in, and one day the union would fall under Ralph's control.
9. An Irish Wake.
The 1970s arrived with a new problem for Natale, and his name was George Feeney. He was a tough guy, a hard-drinking Irishman who liked to run his mouth after a few belts, with a tendency to say things that soon proved hazardous to his health. Feeney was an ex-con affiliated with local union boss Joe McGreal. Natale soon caught wind of Feeney's intemperate comments, particularly regarding Natale's friend and boss.
"It was starting to get around the city. That man downtown, he ain't nothing," Natale said, meaning Angelo Bruno. "Some good people heard that. He could have got killed just for that. People told me they heard what he said. I said, this motherfucker, I'll kill him today. He ain't nothing."
First-hand confirmation came from McGreal, who reported that Feeney was out of control and talking out of school. McGreal finally called Natale one morning at 7:30 a.m. for a sit-down at the Half-Hour Club, a bar owned by McGreal's brother. Natale appeared amid the morning boozers with a solution.
I said, "Well, call him now. Tell him you want to talk to him, and when he shows up, I'll splatter his fucking brains."
Natale matter-of-factly recalled. McGreal was stunned.
"Ralphie, it's broad daylight. Everybody's gonna see."
A plan was hatched. They would meet up with Feeney that Sunday at Billy Duke's, a club on Route 73 in Jersey. From there, all three would go down to a bar in Swampoodle, the Irish section of Philadelphia. McGreal implored Natale not to whack Feeney in the tavern.
I said, "Do you think I'm crazy?"
Natale remembered.
And McGreal said, "Don't make me answer that, Ralphie."
The plan was put into motion, although Feeney initially blanched at going into the city from Billy Duke's. But Ralph proved persuasive, approaching Feeney in the men's room.
I said, "Listen, I don't want to shoot you, but I will fucking shoot you. Your friend and my friend Joey, we have a problem, and I can't have that. Let's go where we're safe. Let's go down to the Irish Club." He looked at me and said, "Okay, I'm gonna come."
It was the next to last bad decision of George Feeney's life. The bar was jammed and the jukebox blaring on the Sunday night when Natale arrived. He greeted the bartender, an ex-pug who once fought in Madison Square Garden. Connected with McGreal and Feeney, Natale suggested the three men go upstairs to the bar's office and talk. Ralph went into the second-floor bathroom and overheard the irate McGreal trying to talk some sense into his pal. McGreal pulled a gun on Feeney, who was sitting in a chair, and started shouting, "I told you to shut your mouth!" Then Feeney made his final faux pas. "Fuck him!" he yelled about Natale. "And fuck the old man down there. We should kill them both."
"I hear this as I'm coming out of the bathroom," said Natale. I was furious. I grabbed the gun out of McGreal's hand. I put 3 in Feeney's face. Boom, boom, boom. Right in his fucking dome. Done. Then I told McGreal, get this piece of shit out of here.
Another union official entered the room with Feeney's blood and brains now splattered on the floor and nearly vomited. Problem solved. 10. The Razor's Edge. When DeTullio died of a heart attack in the early 70s, Bruno summoned Natale for a one-on-one sit-down. Once they were done, Natale stepped into the shoes of the very man who taught him everything about the Mafia. He was honored and humbled as he exited the meeting.
Ange said, you know, your friend and my dear friend is gone, but he's not gone. I said, you're right, 'cause I still feel him. And he said, that's not really what I meant, because he's sitting right next to me. It's you. That was all he had to say.
Natale, a true believer, became unquestionably loyal to Bruno, eager to handle any tasks of any kind requested by the boss. But their relationship transcended mere business. On Thursday nights, when Bruno and his wife had a weekly dinner date, he would sometimes invite the Natales along. One night, the two men were discussing how others in the crime family were jealous of their friendship.
You're gonna face this, Bruno told him. That's what's happening with all these other people around you.
Natale, to keep their wives from overhearing, said softly,
I don't give a fuck what they say or what they care about me. I care about you.
Looking back, Natale is sure the boss already knew what was coming before Natale said a single word.
He saw it. I didn't kiss his ass. He knew what I meant. Ange was the man I wanted to be, in my life.
Natale would get there, but the path was filled with twists and turns too treacherous to contemplate. One of the biggest came in the form of Charlie Allen, the bastard nephew of legendary gangster Blinky Palermo. Blinky's brother knocked up a local Philly girl, but couldn't pass along his name, so young Charlie took his mother's instead, even as he hung around with his father's mob cohorts.
He was half nuts, even as a kid, said Natale. Herding cats and dogs, a real screwball.
Allen, while doing federal time in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, landed the position of bodyguard for imprisoned Teamsters boss Jimmy Hoffa. Doing time in the same penitentiary was Ralphie's old union pal McGreal, who became friendly with a Gambino family-made man by the name of John Gotti. The two shared a love for conversation, often about things better off left unsaid. The penitentiary gave the two plenty of time to chat. Years later, Gotti, by then the head of the Gambinos, died in prison after running his mouth about mob business and mob murders, as FBI agents listened via wiretaps installed inside his Little Italy headquarters. But for now, the future Dapper Don wore only a prison jumpsuit, as he did time for stealing cargo from John F. Kennedy International Airport near his Queens home. The jailhouse topic of conversation between Gotti and McGreal was about something 2 hours south of the Big Apple, Atlantic City. The mouthy McGreal was the head of Local 170 of the Hotel Employees and Restaurant Employees International Union. Its ranks were certain to swell with the influx of business in the seaside resort, and the Philadelphia family had already made its intentions quite clear about grabbing control of the local union.
Joe McGreal, he started bragging, I got a union, Natale said. And John Gotti's another guy, bum, bum, bum. I got this, and I'm gonna be that. You could bet your life on it, they're gonna get together. And they started talking about Atlantic City, because everybody thought Atlantic City would become the Vegas of the East. When Gotti hears this about the union, he doesn't know that Carlo Gambino and Angelo Bruno had joined together. It was none of his business.
Gotti, who knew well enough not to get in the middle of such things, sent word to his underboss, Agnello Mr. Neil Della Croce, about the union guy willing to throw in with the Gambinos if Atlantic City opened up. Della Croce had a reputation as an old-school guy who took no bullshit from anyone, and he brought the news directly to his boss, Gambino. Della Croce was
a real man. When he was told something, he did it,
recalled Natale.
'Cause if you question a boss, especially Carlo Gambino, the next morning you will not draw a breath. Gotti did his job. He sent it back to Della Croce, and he told Gambino.
Gambino reached out to Bruno, who assured New York that he was putting Natale on the problem. Ralphie knew this talk was jeopardizing the deal reached by Gambino, Accardo, and Bruno, but he still hoped, somewhat uncharacteristically, to take care of things without any bloodshed.
I did everything possible not to be forced to kill McGreal when he was released from prison,
Natale recalled. He traveled from Philadelphia to the Pennsylvania Penitentiary for a jailhouse sit-down with McGreal to explain the facts of life.
He was told, in no uncertain terms, that the Union now belonged to La Cosa Nostra, and when he came home, he would be compensated,
Natale remembered. During the prison visit, Natale assured McGreal that his cooperation would come with a golden parachute, a down payment on a beautiful home in the Jersey suburbs, a lucrative contract with Schmidt's Brewery in Philadelphia, and a brand-new Cadillac.
"That's what I got him," Natale says. "But he kept talking. I told him, 'You're making me look bad because it goes straight upstairs to Della Croce and Gambino.' Ange was like, 'What did you do? Did you pick the wrong guy for this? This is a big deal with the gambling, with this, with that.'"
Then Mouthy McGreal dropped another bombshell behind bars, this one courtesy of Charlie Allen. McGreal had pulled him aside with an offer: kill Natale and collect your share of the pot of gold soon to arrive in Atlantic City. Allen, who generally would kill anybody for $5,000, considered his options and Ralphie's reputation. He ratted McGreal out to the mob.
He thought, "Ralphie's already there. Angela loves him. I gotta be crazy,"
said Natale. He never forgot the words uttered from McGreal to Allen once they reached Philadelphia.
"Don't rush it. Get it right, because Ralphie, you gotta be careful with him."
Once out of Lewisburg, Allen made a beeline to his uncle, Blinky Palermo, who unhesitatingly informed Bruno of the nascent scheme. Palermo then shared the tale with Natale as the two men sat at Ralphie's table in the main dining room at the Garden State racetrack, overlooking the finish line. Allen was looking for a reward, a pat on the back from Bruno for his information. If Palermo had told Natale first, the reception would have been far different. Ralphie didn't trust Allen, regardless of his blood ties to his pal. His preference was to put a bullet between Charlie's eyes and let the chips fall. But before he could do anything, Natale was summoned from the racetrack to meet with Bruno. Natale called his driver, Frankie Vadino, and said he would be waiting outside the clubhouse entrance. The call from Bruno came with a message: don't stop anywhere along the way. The boss knew how his old friend Natale would react if he ran into Allen, deliberately or not. Natale paid his tab at the track and went out to meet Vadino, climbing into the shotgun seat before they pulled away. Natale was pissed off at Palermo for going to the boss, and the news sent his mind racing and his blood boiling. This was the kind of information that he wanted to hear first.
"I was angry when I heard Allen was involved," Natale said. "After all, it was about killing me. Don't I have a right to be angry?"
There was one immediate concern. What if Allen had decided to gun Natale down instead of going to Blinky? The thought just ate at Natale as Vadino steered the Buick Electra toward the Walt Whitman Bridge in South Philly.
"Just suppose Charlie Allen came over to the track on the pretense of saying hello after doing 10 years, but had something else in mind," Natale said years later. "Like putting 2 holes in my head while I was welcoming him home." The two men rode in silence until Natale told Vadino to get off at Broad Street and head to Bruno's home. Vadino finally broke the uncomfortable quiet. "What's up?" wondered the typically taciturn driver. "That Irishman," Ralph responded tersely, "has decided to be more than he was ever intended to be."
Natale then laid the whole thing out to his driver. Palermo had gone to Bruno first to save his nephew's life. He knew that Natale would unquestionably whack Allen, as both an act of self-preservation and a message to McGreal and anybody else that Natale was not to be fucked with.
"What are we going to do?" asked Vadino. "I'll tell you what we're going to do," Natale snapped. "We're going to turn right on Snyder Avenue and go see the chief."
The tone indicated this was the last answer coming from Natale for the rest of the ride. The two men drove on, accompanied only by the sounds of the car's engine and its 4 spinning wheels. Vadino parked out front and waited outside as Natale knocked gently on the boss's front door. Bruno was blunt when Natale came inside.
"It's about the Irishman in your neighborhood. He's trying to be something he ain't."
It wasn't the first time that the two had had this conversation, and Natale assured the boss that everything was under control.
"Don't worry about it," said Natale. "I'm going to go up and see him.
Bruno was just as blunt about Alan. Not only would he live, but he would join Natale's crew over in New Jersey. And so it was said, as Natale often observed, and so it was done.
Make sure he makes a living, Bruno counseled, because he gave up McGreal about killing you, and maybe killing me too. Angelo Bruno inadvertently caused the downfall of me and my crew and opened the doors for the treachery in Tony Banana's heart,
Natale said decades later. Ralph found a place for Alan with his crew, handling chores from arson for hire to extorting local businesses to truck hijackings. Natale made his second trip to Lewisburg in 6 months, meeting again in the visitor's room with McGreal. The sit-down was brief, with McGreal implausibly insisting that he had said nothing to anyone about the union situation, much less a word to anybody from the New York families. He thanked Natale for the help coming his way once he returned to the streets. The two men shook hands, with Natale looking into McGreal's eyes and seeing nothing. On the ride home, Natale thought of an old adage.
If a man does not listen to the first note of the song, he will never listen to the rest.
The trip that Natale never took was the one he most wanted to make, a visit with Charlie Allen.
I would have went to see him,
Natale said.
I would have killed him and anybody he's with. I don't care if he's in his mother's house. She's gonna go too. I'm gonna kill him. And now I'm looking at Blinky. What am I gonna do?
The loyal soldier and friend, instead of following his instinct, did nothing. He even gave Alan a second pass after the mob underling griped that his partner in a series of hijackings deserved a bigger cut of the pie.
I said, more? For what? Natale recalled. I looked at him. You know what was in my heart? I'm gonna kill him. I told him, why don't you meet me tomorrow at the Holiday Inn in the back? 7 o'clock in the morning. We could talk. That morning I got in the car. In the 5-minute ride I said, what a mistake I made. Truth on my children. I see his car back there and I said, I can't kill this guy. I gotta give him a chance. So this is my life, and I didn't kill him.
Charlie Allen, like a bad penny, would resurface to remind Natale of his error in judgment. But Natale now had something more pressing on his plate. The murder of McGreal, as directed by his boss.
Joe McGreal's fate was sealed. As sure as the spring follows winter, Natale decided. I said to myself, Joe McGreal is a dead man.
3 years after McGreal watched in disbelief as Natale whacked Feeney, it was his turn. On Christmas night, 1973, on direct orders from Angelo Bruno. After Natale left his family around the television, he went to meet with his unsuspecting target. McGreal, godfather to one of Natale's daughters, never realized the end was near until they pulled into the darkened parking lot outside a shuttered restaurant. During the ride to meet with McGreal, Natale reflected on the past. McGreal's cause of death, in Natale's mind, was putting his trust in a weasel such as Alan to keep his mouth shut. McGreal's destiny was now controlled by the person sitting in the back seat of a car, and his name was Ralph Natale.
Boom, boom, boom,
Natale recalled.
3 shots in the same hole.
The timing of the killing perfectly bothered Natale, who was typically immune to such thoughts. He even considered calling the whole thing off, but in the end he pulled the trigger and pumped 3 hollow-point bullets into McGreal's head.
When you take a man's tomorrows, there's more than just saying it, he reflected years later. More. No matter how cold-blooded, cold-hearted, could there be a reason why? Not that there's a good reason to take anybody's tomorrows, but sometimes it has to be done.
Joe McGreal was gone before the Christmas lights of South Philly came down. The local TV news blared news of the mob hit throughout the next day. Natale knew that Bruno would be pleased, and his Atlantic City partners placated. The boss had picked the right man to protect their future interests. A young Philly Turk once told Natale that his handiwork with a gun was greatly admired among the local mob conoscenti. Wayne Grande, who later emerged as one of the most treacherous and untrustworthy mobsters in Philly's long and twisted history, recalled his dad providing a glowing review of Natale the shooter.
He said, you know, Ralphie, when I was a kid, boy, how things get around, Natale said. My father, when Joe McGreal was found in the car dead, the next day my father said, that was Ralphie. And that was the truth.
Natale made his share of enemies, with the keen eyes of his wife, Lucia, sparing him from one hit attempt by a vengeful pal of McGreal in the mid-70s. Natale was hanging out at the Holiday Inn bar opposite the Garden State racetrack, waiting for Lucia to meet him for dinner. Their son dropped her off, and she came inside to see her husband holding court with his crew. Outside, Rick Conti sat stewing behind the wheel of his car, the murder of Ralph Natale occupying his every thought.
All the guys stood up. "Lucia, sit here," she said. "Ralphie, before I sit down, can I speak to you?" I knew something was up, Natale remembered. We walk into the lobby. She says, "That guy Rick, he's out in the parking lot. He's in his car. And when he saw me, he sort of bent his head down." I said to myself, "Oh, this motherfucker." He was a pretty good boxer and a good friend of Joe McGreal. He was going around drinking and talking, "I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. I'm going to get even."
Natale assured his wife it was nothing and told her to sit down and have a drink. Then he asked his bartender pal, Franny McDonnell, if a certain shipment of wine had arrived.
He knew what I meant, Ralph recalled. I go in back where the wine is, and I told him, "Get your 38 and come around from the back. That punk's out there. He wants to get even. I'm going to let him try. This is 5:30 at night. The last race is over." I said, "I'm going to kill this motherfucker right now, in broad daylight. I don't care." But he saw Franny, and then he knew I was coming. He pulled away.
Natale summoned his deadliest associates, Mike Marone and Ronnie Turchi, and began scouring the local mob hangouts for the would-be shooter, only to come up empty. But Natale was not one to forget even the smallest of slights, much less an aborted attempt to put 2 bullets into his head. When their paths unexpectedly crossed a year later, every detail came flooding back.
Ange had set word to meet him at 1 p.m. at Freddie Yetzi's bar, Natale recalled. I brought along Mike Marone because in those days you never knew if your number was coming up, you know? There's a group of men sitting in the back of the bar with Ange and Phil Testa. Then I knew everything was all right. Ange just like having me around.
The party included Russell Bufalino, who ran the mob's operations in northeast Pennsylvania. Natale greeted the boss with a handshake and a kiss on the cheek, a violation of Bruno's usual rules, but one that was ignored among this small group of important mafiosi. The other guests, to Natale's disbelief, included Conti, now working for Bufalino. Ralph, though outwardly calm, felt the surge of a murderous payback rise in his suddenly boiling blood, enough that Bruno could see the signs of anger in Natale. The underlings said nothing to anyone as the 2 bosses conducted business and watched silently as Conti left with Bufalino. Natale remained quiet even as Bruno asked him for a ride to lawyer Jacob Kosman's office. Bruno sat up front, and underboss Testa took the back seat. The uncomfortable 10-minute quiet was finally broken by the boss.
"Why did you look so aggressive when you were introduced to that young guy? What was the problem?"
The enraged Natale, throwing mob protocol to the wind, spoke the brutal truth about his feelings toward a fellow mobster from another family.
"I said something that I don't think anybody ever said to any boss at any time. The next time I see that guy, I'm gonna kill him. I don't give a fuck."
Looking in the rear-view mirror, Natale saw a small grin flash across the face of the typically dour Testa.
The first time I ever saw him smile.
Bruno was stunned by the declaration.
"You're gonna give me a heart attack."
But Natale recounted the racetrack tale and Conti's boozy threats in the barrooms of South Philly. When Bruno heard the details, he offered to handle the killing personally. Natale became even angrier at the mere suggestion.
"You know what I told him? If you do that for me, you'll lose me for the rest of my life. You can't take care of my personal business." He's got a little smile on his face, and he said, "Okay, just drop me off. Tomorrow morning, just make sure you come over and have coffee."
Natale explained his reasoning at the breakfast get-together.
"Ange, I love you, but nobody's catching me with my pants on the ground. Because if you take care of it, that means I'm not the man you think I am. Is that what you want him to think?"
The postscript. Natale never laid his eyes on Conti again, probably the best for both parties.
"I never found that bastard,"
he said ruefully. With Natale and his growing family in the Jersey suburbs, he landed a legitimate gig tending bar once again, this time at the Rickshaw Inn, a popular spot opposite the racetrack in Cherry Hill. The place doubled as Natale's base of illegal operations.
I wanted to make some extra money, and I enjoyed it,
he said of his decision to get back behind the stick.
The owners thought I could keep a lot of trash out of there. What a magnificent place. I would meet different people there, you knew who you could trust, and it was 5 minutes from my house.